After 3 seasons of heartbreak, Leinster finally got a Champions Cup knockout win over La Rochelle at the Aviva Stadium on Saturday, and now Leo Cullen's men march on to a semi-final against Northampton at Croke Park in a few weeks' time. And as if news couldn't get any better for Leinster, they announced on Monday evening that All Black star Jordie Barrett will be playing at the RDS and maybe the Aviva Stadium next season. Welcome to the latest Left Wing podcast. Will Slattery here, delighted to be joined by Luke Fitzgerald and Rúaidhrí O'Connor in studio, and that's plenty to get into tonight. We might save the Jordie Barrett transfer bombshell for a little bit later in the show. We'll get to Leinster La Rochelle first. Rud, why did this game go so differently to the heartbreaking defeats of the last few seasons, in your opinion?
There's a couple of reasons behind it. I think Leinster learned the lessons of the final defeats and the semi-final defeat of the last couple of years. I think they drew confidence from the way they won in La Rochelle earlier this season. I thought they were excellent. I thought defensively they were so aggressive, wanted to set the tone from early on, won the big physical battles, won a lot of their kind of early duels, you know, whether it was Furlong knocking Skelton back and then getting up and putting another big shot on, or turnovers from a couple of their key backs at different points, you know, not being fazed by the fact that they lost Hugo Keenan on the eve of the game, on top of losing, you know, their co-captains before the game, you know, in the week before the game as well, or a bit further back than that. I think La Rochelle's fatigue was definitely a factor. I think they haven't been great all season, and we were kind of expecting them to come to life once they got to the business end, but having gone to South Africa, even a couple of days in Cork, couldn't restore them to what they were before, and they looked a bit of a beaten docket in the way that Saracens were in 2018 when Leinster beat them really, really well, when they were going for 3 in a row, and Leo Cullen touched on that, how hard it is. You know, 2013 Leinster didn't get out of their pool when they were going for 3 in a row, so it is a really hard thing to do, having been to a final and then won 2 finals after that, to keep going for that long. So a bit of a perfect storm, full house at the Aviva, you know, a defiance just not to let it happen again. Some unbelievable rugby, both on defence and attack, some incredible accuracy on both sides of the ball, a good selection by the coaching team, the addition of Nienaber, all of these things coming into the melting pot. And I think it'll go down as one of Leinster's great victories. Even if La Rochelle looked a bit beaten, I think Leinster, you know, they still had to go out and do the job, and did it emphatically and kept the foot down for the whole game.
Yeah, you could see Leo Cullen celebrating that last try, how much he was
so unlike him.
Yeah, I know, it really is, isn't it? That kind of really told the story. One thing I wanted to ask you about specifically, Luke, is you mentioned after the final last year how you thought maybe Leinster punched themselves out a bit, maybe were too amped up and they had nothing in the tank. How did you feel like they managed that element of it at the weekend? It seemed to be a lot more in control, by maybe a couple of missed try chances, which I know we were texting about at the time.
We were, yeah. I still have a few concerns about them. A bit of white line fever in the team. They should have finished, like James Lowe was a gilt-edged one. He absolutely should have finished that one. And I did feel like Gibson Park, just a little bit, he's not a big man, so like that close to the line you nearly think, oh, maybe just one more phase. I know it looked like it was there was a sniff of it, but there was one more phase in that, and I think they had La Rochelle broken. So I still think there's some thinking for them to do there. They need to have, like, because you can't be throwing away those opportunities, and that game was still, like, I was nervous at halftime. I was thinking, oh no, like, they kind of given them up some, like, lots of easy penalty chances, so that was kind of a bit silly. And I think look, there was some good play with La Rochelle there too, but Leinster are too good to be giving away those ones, and like that game was still there for La Rochelle at halftime, and really they had no right. And I thought, I just thought the weight and the strength, I was thinking when they got over that maul, I was thinking, oh no, like, here we go again. They're going to hang around. Leinster are going to get nervous, and La Rochelle are going to pip them again. But I did think they looked, when they came out after half time, first try was always going to be, or first score was going to be key, and they looked, that really settled them down. And I thought, like, some of the quality of the rugby they played under pressure in first and second half, I thought quite clearly they had decided that was going to be a tactic to get to the middle of the pitch, and if they had time to look for the ball in behind the wingers, and they used that really effectively. We mentioned before we were on air about Osborne, that crossfield kick in the first half, like, that takes serious guts to do that. A guy who's not in the team that long, I thought he had a really good day, and we'll learn a lot from that, we'll grow as a player. But Henshaw's one was beautiful in the second half of the try. I mean, that was just a bit of magic. I thought they deserved it. I was really pleased that they kind of remained calm and had I talked last week about having kind of that assassin type mentality, that kind of cold, calculated type mentality. And I thought Leinster really demonstrated that and put them to the sword. And I agree, I thought they did look a little bit tired and jaded, because the telltale for me really was that scrum in the second half. Now, I know Leinster still had a big pack out there. there, some really quality operators. But that's been an area where Ireland and Leinster have kind of had, the bigger games have struggled a little bit, and against that La Rochelle pack have definitely struggled, and most teams would, in fairness. So that told me a lot, I think, about that La Rochelle team and maybe the impact of the travel. But you still have to go out and do it against quality opposition, missing a few key guys, Ringrose and Keenan in that back line, and James Ryan, who I thought would be key. I actually thought that was going to be the deciding factor, but I actually thought the guys 1 to 5 really stepped up. So it was a brilliant performance. They can be really pleased. Can't say I saw that coming. It's certainly not the margin of victory. And I think, they'll feel really, really good about that. The key for them now is to back it up. Can they stay cold and calculated and not get too ahead of themselves?
Yeah, in terms of Jacques Nienaber's impact, if you just even look at the statistics, they only conceded 1 try at the weekend. They conceded 3 in both final defeats, especially they didn't concede a point in the second half. The 3 second halves were hugely damaging in the 3 knockout defeats. They lost all of them by, I think, 8 points and more. So defensively, how impressed were you? Because obviously, the joke has been made like a million times about 14 weeks, etc., etc. But it was a very good defensive performance, and it kind of did tie in with what people maybe had in mind when he was first announced as the senior coach.
Yeah, and I think we all became kind of fixated on their line speed when he first came in and how that would look. But what we've really seen is how important the breakdown is to what he does, and the way they turn every breakdown into what they call a shit fight, and they basically pile bodies in. Dan Sheehan did it in the first ruck. And it's what La Rochelle did to Leinster in so many of those games, where they disrupted Leinster's flow by piling massive bodies into the ruck and just slowing it down and making it dirty and basically making sure that Leinster were playing on La Rochelle's terms. And I think on Saturday, La Rochelle had to play on Leinster's terms an awful lot. And the selection of Connors has been smart for both games. And look, Leo Cullen picks the team, but I think Nienaber's influence in terms of kind of going, this is a horse for a particular course, I think can't be overlooked. Even the selection of Milne on the bench, I had a Cian Healy. That was a brave call from whoever made it, and went for the more kind of the younger, more dynamic, probably less established, less experienced. Cian Healy had been good off the bench the previous week, so I think we're seeing his imprint all over the place.
Sub as well, I think was telling, wasn't it? I mean, the timing of it. Yeah. Did you think? I mean, I just think if you have like a world player of the year on the bench, like bloody use them. Like they do that for South Africa. Like I probably don't agree. We've had this discussion a few times about Snyman being on the bench, and I think he still is a bench player for them. I'd still pick the other guys ahead of him. But certainly, like that's a pretty open debate about Van der Fleer and Connors, absolutely. But he was really great about how he used him. I think more in the kind of way you see South Africa using Snyman on the bench for them, like really attacking and kind of at a crucial juncture in the game. So I thought that was a real telltale as well.
Absolutely. Even the fact they've gone 6-2, and Ireland have done it as well, you can see they're coming around to the South African way of thinking, putting an Irish stamp on it. I mean, Leinster don't look like South Africa. I think they still have their own identity in it, and their attack is way slicker. But what I like as well is, and this happens when a new coach comes in, because a new coach will come in with a new set of eyes, and he'll look at Jordan Larmour in particular in a different way to the way Stuart Lancaster has been working with Jordan Larmour every day for 7 years, sees him, and he clearly sees something in Jordan Larmour that Lancaster maybe didn't see, or has shown him a little bit of love. Apparently he's doing a lot of one-on-one work with the players that in a way that previous coaches maybe didn't, and you can see Larmour has really bought into it and is growing and flourishing with that confidence that's been put in him. And he's winning breakdown turnovers, but he's also looking more and more dangerous on the ball. His confidence is growing. I think his belief has definitely taken a massive knock in the last 3 or 4 years. How could it not do? And yet he gets a start against Scotland in the last Six Nations game. It goes pretty well for him. We've seen him play well for Leinster the last couple of weeks. That was one of his best performances ever for Leinster. And even though Jimmy O'Brien's back fit, he has a lot to do to try and displace Jordan Larmour from that jersey. So he's also helping some really key Irish players get better. He's probably emboldened Ryan Baird, who I think a lot of coaches had doubts over his kind of mentality or his mindset. No one ever doubted his athletic ability, but he's gone, look, this guy looks like Peter Steph Toy. I'm going to use him like Peter Steph Toy, and look, he's got his own physical gifts. And what happens? He races in, beating about 3 La Rochelle defenders.
Should have passed.
Scored a try.
Should have passed. 100% should have passed.
That's what I was saying. Against a good defender, no matter who it is, if it's a 10 or not, you might
hang on, or you'll trip him up at least. Yeah. No, it was funny though. Did you see them embrace? Did you see the photo of Baird and I think Nienaber as he walks into the change room. I was thinking, wow, like they really he's buzzing because he's obviously a bit of a. My sense of Baird is that he's a bit of a. I'm not going to say he's a different personality, but he's certainly doesn't really fit. I think the general mold. He's wears his heart in his sleeve. He's very very open. I think to a fault, to be honest with you. But he looked like there was a good buzz between them when he came in the dressing room. And maybe it was the same with every player, but I thought that looked like there's a connection building there.
Yeah,
maybe.
it's a snapshot in time, but I do think that Baird has. He's come in at a good time in Baird's career.
Yeah.
Baird played against South Africa at the World Cup and then was basically dropped for the last two games, the Scotland game, and didn't play in the quarter final. Joe McCarthy got the nod ahead of him. Having started the Grand Slam game, like Baird's career has been at a bit of a crossroads at times. Like he hasn't, he's 24 now. This is the time where he needs to be starting games for Leinster, and he had a good Six Nations. I think Nienaber has just arrived at the right time for him. McCarthy as well. Like, look, everyone can see how good McCarthy is, and Ireland had already capped him by the time he came. But he's just gone right, pick those two guys and make them do basically
straight
cause
away,
chaos.
Like a more physical pack with them on the pitch. I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And
it's question there.
no, I do agree, but I think that's what he's brought. And look, like Stuart Lancaster did a phenomenal job at Leinster, but I think it's fair to say that it had gone a little bit stale within the setup. Whatever the style of play was still very good last year. I don't think relationships were very strong. Amongst the coaches, I think they just all worked together a little bit too long towards the end. So you're bringing in someone who's just new, who's got 2 World Cup medals, so he instantly commands respect when he stands in front of the room, and he's also got ideas. He's got a new way of playing, and the players have really bought into it. And I like whatever Leinster have done in the last 3 or 4 weeks. They've turned a group of players who looked unbelievably stale at the end of the Six Nations. Well, they didn't look the stale team on Saturday. They looked so fresh, so ready. They conserved energy against Leicester in the last 16 game, and I wondered whether they were going to be able to turn it back on. But like the performance they delivered. Andy Farrell's going to be getting these players back for the South Africa tour. They're in better shape than they were when he left them. And
I think the one thing, just a little nugget from me. I'm sure Luke McGrath won't mind me saying, but I spoke to him briefly when he came in. I said, "Listen, what's Nienaber like?" I literally met him in a coffee shop around the corner, and he said, really smart was the one thing he said, and that was kind of how Joe Schmidt, when he came in, it was like, wow, like you're kind of just a different way of thinking. I got that sense, like that's all he said to me. Obviously I was like, look, I'm not looking for any inside info, just what's the first impressions. And I think he said everyone thinks like smart, so like that reinvigorates a place, re-energizes a place. You'd have to think fresh ideas, and as you said, I think it's a great point, the fresh set of eyes on players. You feel like you got another opportunity, and Jordan Larmour's a great example.
It was a perfect time. Like, they'd lost 2 finals in a row that they should have probably won both. It was probably a time for, as you say, a fresh set of eyes to come in. It's funny because you're talking about it today, and to be fair, I've been asking you these kind of questions about what was so different, what was this, what was that. Like, you still think like they should have won those other games as well. Like, it's not as if there was a drastic need for loads of changes, but to be fair, you've identified a number of things that were different.
It was always going to be small things, wasn't it? Like,
they all add up. Like, you picked maybe 4 or 5 things that were small. Like, even like the selection of Will Connors, he's barely featured for Leinster he played a few URC games since that La Rochelle game. They've already earmarked him for that role. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play again in the knockout.
No, I don't know if that. I think he'll be on the
bench, maybe.
I think definitely, yeah. I think that like that 1-2 punch, whether it's Van der Fleer starting or whether it's him starting, like that, I thought that was devastating on the weekend. And I think if you can have someone that disruptive on the pitch for that long, it gives you opportunities, but it also saves you at moments. And the two of them are like 2 terriers out there. You know what I mean? So I'm not so. I actually feel like you might be. You could be right in the end here, but my sense is that I think that'd be wrong. I think actually, I think they've stumbled on something, and I think if Connors can stay fit, which is the key thing with him. I'd be playing those 2 guys together. It doesn't matter who you start with, but I definitely having the 2 of them in your squad.
I think it comes down to whether you stick with the 6-2. But if you've got 6-2, he is ahead of Deegan or a Scott Penny at this stage. I think even if he's not starting now, maybe he doesn't give you the punch off the bench that one of those players does, and you got Natai, you've got Jimmy O'Brien coming back, so maybe you gravitate towards 5-3 if you start with Josh. But it's a live selection discussion, and I've been watching Chasing the Sun, as I referenced in here before. The fact that like South Africa in the World Cup or even in the Rugby Championship before this World Cup kept changing their team, all with the view to the opposition, France, in the quarterfinal, not knowing who they picked. So even the fact that when Northampton are analysing Leinster for the next 3 weeks, they don't know who the Leinster 7 is going to be, and Leinster's style changes depending on which player is going to be there.
I think come in on the Chasing the Sun thing. Like, there's so much that's come out of that I'm like, They won in spite of this, in my opinion.
That's what I think.
I don't think it's a massive stroke to be like some of the stuff that's come out of it. Like obviously they won the World Cup, so
winners write history.
Exactly.
Oh,
some of the stuff I'm like, they definitely they won it because their players were believable, and then they kind of overcome
the
this
best resources,
arminess.
100%.
They're a great team, but I think some of it, that in particular, like that rationale to me.
I'm so glad you said that.
I don't think it makes a huge pile of sense personally.
I'm
think it's
so
genius.
glad you said it. No, I'm so glad you said that because I was railing about that in the World. I thought they were the best team in the World Cup in spite of some of the selection decisions. Now there was 100% some. You can tell from them they're always trying to find an edge. I did like that about them. You know, they're thinking outside the box about nearly everything in the rules, even from the 22 ruling, even though that was a complete. To be honest with you, that was a silly decision as well, and like that was crazy. Some of those ones were absolute madness. Do you know what I mean? But like I did like they're definitely really smart, but I thought they overthunk loads of things and they got away with it because they have the best group of players. Like even the squad selections, like all the scrum halves, like how they left themselves short at hooker, like the crazy stuff, like really crazy. That nearly cost them. And then the selections at 10. The one thing I think that they are really good at is when they make a mistake. I think they're really good at fixing it quickly. They're not afraid to make the change quickly. They spot what's going wrong. When Libbok, when it wasn't working out, Pollard came straight in. But Pollard should have been starting the match, and that made no sense to have him there because he was an injury concern. So bringing him off the bench left you really hamstrung if he went down. So that was a silly mistake. He should always have been starting, and they would never have been in trouble if he was starting anyway. So I think they're brilliant. I definitely think that, but I thought they're. A lot of things here, but I do feel like they were they made a lot of selection mistakes. I just thought they were really good at fixing them quickly, which I think is something Leinster can learn from.
I don't know if we need to relitigate the World
No,
Cup.
no,
We've done before. So I do have some thoughts. We should probably move on.
Let's move on. One player I want to ask you about, Ross Byrne, obviously under the microscope coming into the game, about whether he should be starting, about his form generally, about whether he's the right man to lead Leinster to a Champions Cup, and that remains to be seen over the next match and possibly a second one. But he was man of the match, kicked very well and very difficult conditions, like especially at the stadium, like Rod, it was a swirling breeze. It was kind of tricky, I'd say, to get his eye in, especially in the first half. It was even windier again, and given that he missed 2 conversions in the opening quarter last year, that would have been a big kind of thing he would want to get right. So how do you think he played? Do you think
I thought he was good, but like it was a virtue of how the pack performed. It's the same thing. Like my view on that stuff hasn't really changed that much. Gibson Park looked like an absolute hero because again, Leinster's pack mixed it up with the La Rochelle guys, and that was the key component. And I thought, even the defence plays a part in that as well. Like they weren't going backwards all day. There was loads of parts that I think helped Leinster's playmakers really perform to their best ability and showcase what they're about. And I thought that was why. To be honest with you, I don't think it's any more simple than that or any more complicated than that, because I didn't think Byrne was as bad last year. I thought Leinster's pack got completely decimated for the last 60 minutes or 55 minutes of the game, and we're as you mentioned about that tactic about really making the rucks a shit fight, as Leinster were calling it. La Rochelle have been doing that to Leinster in the key moments and in the second halves, and off the back of that, the playmakers looked absolutely shocking the last couple of years when it came to crunch time. It's because they had no options around them. It's because they had no width on the pitch. It's really easy to defend that, no matter who's playing at 9 and 10. Like Dan Carter would look pretty average in those conditions as well, I think. So I was really pleased for Ross that he got an opportunity to showcase the ability, and I think the kicking was big for him. But again, I think that was probably pretty harsh last year. There was 1 or 2 of them. He should have got one of them, but the first kick was way out on the touch. Like it was a...
They're both touchline conversions.
Yeah, but he missed one that he should have got as well, and probably I didn't think it was as bad a decision not to step into the pocket for the drop goal, because I thought they should have probably scored a try with a bar some pretty bad rucking. But I think he got pretty harshly treated last year, and I didn't think he probably deserved it as bad as he did.
Yeah, I thought he showed his physical toughness as well as his mental toughness. One moment in particular in the build up to Ryan Baird's try, he got, I think he used the phrase himself, melted. He got absolutely emptied by Ujai Sitani, and 2 phases later he's standing up delivering that quick pass and taking another shot en route to Baird, scarpering down the left wing, and it just showed. His injury was so badly timed this year. It was pretty much the first injury he's ever had in his career, and durability is kind of unquantifiable in terms of like you can't identify durability in a 20-year-old player when he's coming through, but an ability to pitch up week after week is like it's probably the most underrated skill in rugby, you know, in professional sport. So I think he's got that. You know, he's always been there for Leinster. He's been such a servant to them, and I think I do have doubts over his ability at the top level. I think, you know, he lacks the pace of some of his rivals, and that's probably why Andy Farrell goes with Jack Crowley, and why he hasn't got more caps than what he has, as well as some questionable selections at Twickenham early in his career, which damaged his and people's confidence in him. But I think he looked the part on Saturday. It doesn't look like he's going to hold Leinster back at all. And he's not going to be the reason why they don't get there, I don't think, unless he has an absolute meltdown with the boot. But that's not in his nature.
He probably could, though, couldn't he? I mean, if you think of how good Gibson Park has been running the game, like, because Leinster's pack are so on top of all the teams they play, and you just can't, even when you think of the guys coming off the bench, like, it just doesn't stop. It's absolutely relentless, you know. And they haven't even had to play that well this year to let, like, Gibson Park seems to be running amok every single week, and I do think it's because of how well the team is playing and the pack particularly. And I think Byrne will definitely, I think he'll really benefit from that. Any 10 would. You know, I think Frawley, I think Harry would look great in there as well. Prendergast, I still think, is a bit off, but like, yeah, I think whoever was sitting there for Leinster could be just okay, and still the team would do well.
I'll probably sign Bowden Barrett.
Get the set. Yeah, look, I was really pleased for him. It's a nice moment for him. I think it's a bit of a. I'm hoping that's a real catalyst to kind of to bring him on, because we do need someone to be competing with Crowley too. Like, you want to have a live option there. Playing week in, week out. And I think the point you make about the durability, really important for a 10. We see how badly Carberry, I mean, as much as I don't think he probably is a 10, I do think he has been very unlucky with his injuries, and that has really curtailed his progress and his career, really. So that's an important feature to have, and it's really helpful if you're there every week, even in training. Even the guys know you really well, the coaches know you really well, you know the game plan inside out. So I think that's you're right, it's hard to quantify, but like, if you're playing with guys like that are like that, like Jamie Heaslip was that guy for my Leinster teams, I think the players really value it, you know. So great to see.
We mentioned Leo Cullen's celebration earlier. Ross Byrne had a similar kind of like release on the touchline just at the end, because obviously, having been a central character in the final last year, I'm sure it was a nice moment for him. Just a few of the players just before we move on to the Jordie Barrett news that I wanted to mention. Like Tyke Furlong, I thought was absolutely outstanding. I thought his best game. Some lovely touches, some big hits, really good. Joe McCarthy, it's a funny one. We didn't really.
The jukebox was back.
Yeah, it was almost like Joe McCarthy, like, obviously was such a key man at the start of the Six Nations, kind of tailed off, and I'd kind of almost forgotten the build up that he wasn't really around for the other La Rochelle knockout games. Like, I thought he had a big impact, you know, around the pitch.
He was good over there too, I think, wasn't he? Like, I still think I was worried Baird wasn't going to be, Ryan wasn't on the pitch. I really thought he'd be a defining factor, but and by the way, like, I think your first Six Nations is really taxing on the body. I remember it myself thinking, like, when we came to the end of it, you're absolutely exhausted, kind of mentally and physically. So, and particularly in that position, like, I was on the wing, it's a bit of a different story, but still, like, if you're in the row like that, for a young guy, like, that body, he is still growing into that body, I think, and will get better. But that's always a tough one. Even Crowley at the end, I thought, looked like he looked a little jaded too. So those guys will only get better and better and more durable as time goes on. So it was good to see him have an impact and turn it around a little bit.
He's loving it as well, though. It's like I think he's relishing everything about it. I think you can see that this experience, he's not letting it pass him by. Even like the offload he had in the bit
build up,
but he had his hand in the, like, he was standing on halfway, one arm in the air. Like,
you need to stop doing that. Himself and Lowe, Lowe is like celebrating before tries are happening. It's driving me mad.
But I just love the fact that he's 21. He's like on top of his game. He's like, you know, he's just a bit of a rock star, and he knows it as well. I'm sure he's humble and all that sort of stuff, but he doesn't look humble all the time. And I think humility is overrated sometimes, particularly when we're looking for stars and people who are interesting. Like, we got him in a huddle, or in a kind of one of those kind of group interviews 2 weeks ago, and I kind of asked him about his form tailing off in the Six Nations, and he didn't really agree with me that it had. But, you know, he kind of was a bit put out by it. But
what did you ask him?
I just asked, like, did he feel like Marseille, it was hard to back up Marseille, and that it, you know, maybe like England was a tough day for him. You know, there's no going about it. He was outmatched by George Martin and Ollie Chesson that day. They did a real number on him, but no one did a number on him last weekend. And, you know, he's become a very important player very, very quickly, and he hasn't got the baggage either. I think that's a good point that he wasn't around. Baird's the same. Like, and there's a freshness to the two of them that I think has helped the other players get a bit of energy as well, because they're lightening the load for those other players.
Kind of unshackled, I think.
Connors wasn't
when you're
around
like
in
that,
those finals either, you know.
Yeah, I'd like Connors. I'd love to see Connors. The Connors have never played for Ireland in front of a crowd.
Yeah.
He got his run during COVID. That injury struck. I'd love to see it. Like, I mean, Andy Farrell must be looking at this going, this guy can do a job for us in South Africa.
Definitely, because he's very suited. He fills a specific role. Like, I feel like, say, Northampton, the semi-final, potentially maybe not the game to start him, but Toulouse maybe again with their big ball carriers in the pack. Maybe unlike South Africa, obviously.
Why wouldn't you play? I don't understand why you wouldn't just keep playing the 6-2. Like, if you have Frawley's going to be on the bench if Keenan's back. Like,
But you could start Josh and put. You could.
Oh no, sorry, sorry. I'm not saying it, but he definitely would be on my bench.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm just saying more from a starting role. I don't know. It depends, because Northampton obviously.
And Northampton have good ball carriers. Like, Northampton will pose Leinster problems in a different way to La Rochelle, but they do have. You got Courtney Laws, Ludlam, and Curtis Langland's really good. Like, they're a good team, and they present some of the challenges that Connor's kind of negates.
I'd be trying to beat everyone up if I was Leinster.
Yeah.
I would. I don't think they need to get too jazzy about it. I think, like, if you've got like probably 10, 11 international forwards, and like, I'd be picking them.
Yeah.
I would 100% pick them and say, try and stop me. I'm going to bully you off the pitch. That's what I'm going to try and do. And by the way, while I'm doing that, if you get too tight and you try and get an arm wrestle with me, we're going to go wide and we're going to mince you out there. You know what I mean? So like, I would say there's a pretty easy blueprint to follow. You don't need to overcomplicate this if you're Leinster. And Connors, to my mind, is like, if he's fit and he's playing well, he's right in the mix with Van der Fleer for me.
Yeah, certainly had a great game at the weekend and put his hand up for selection. Let's discuss the Jordie Barrett news then. Obviously, Monday evening, it was an interesting bombshell that was dropped. It got obviously a lot of attention. What's your initial feeling? Like, there's a lot of different things being said that, like, it's unfair that Leinster are able to do this. The other provinces falling further behind. Leinster benefiting from the central contract system, the way it's structured, freeing up budget to be used in this way. Other people are saying, like, Leinster are doing nothing wrong. They're entitled to sign who they want if it's within the parameters, which this is. So what do you think?
Yeah, I'm slightly conflicted on it, because Leinster are doing nothing wrong. They're spending their budget and they're spending it on. They've changed their strategy. So they have, in the last couple of years, signed overseas signings who kind of complement their squad, like Jason Jenkins, Charlie Natai, Michael Alatoa. If your Ireland internationals are injured, they can step in pretty well. Jenkins did a pretty good job on Saturday as a starter, but James Ryan will come back into the team if he's fit later on in the tournament. Natai similarly is a good bench option. Will start the games when the lads are away. Really good influence around the camp. He's an All Black. He's really well respected. Former chief. They've decided to upgrade those two by bringing in a double World Cup winner, Snyman, who's does what he does the best in the world, and then you're bringing in Jordie Barrett. When have we ever had a current All Black join an Irish province? Usually they're on their lap of honour, but the fact that they've even exploited the sabbatical thing, Barrett wants to come to Leinster. He's turning down offers from elsewhere that are higher. He would have got more money elsewhere. He does have a legitimate connection. I don't buy it as the only reason he's coming over, but he did live here as a youngster, and that's not here, but he lived in Meath, and that's part of Leinster, and that's a factor in it. And he will make them better as an operation. So from Leinster's point of view, they've got this budget. They can spend the money. They've just had sellout in Aviva on top, back at 41k. They're going to get some prize money at the end of this, you would imagine. That they just look at it and go, well, we can improve ourselves and we can spend it. Where I don't understand and where I worry about it is the IRFU strategy around it. So Leinster have 10 centrally contracted players, Munster have 2, Ulster have 1, Connacht have 1. The 10 centrally contracted players are essentially taken out of the Leinster budget, and that allows, as well as the income they get off the matches, their benefactors, their sponsors, all that sort of stuff, allows them to go and spend the money they would be spending on Tadhg Furlong, Dan Sheehan, who was announced yesterday, on Snyman and Barrett and maybe Tanya Latupo or a tight head. And like, great for Leinster, and like a backbone, they do backbone the Irish team, and there is a real strength in Leinster being so strong, and then basically Andy Farrell picking 12 or 13 of them and playing them, and it works, even though it's not necessarily great for spreading the game and representing the entire country. But if I can understand why Ulster, Connacht and Munster fans, who've all out of Europe now, all look like they're going to be even weaker next year, probably. You listen to the players that are leaving, the players that are coming in. Ulster linked with Aaron Cruden. Great player, but he's 35 and he hasn't really played much in the last couple of years. you just wonder when is this going to end? Will anyone ever be able, any of the Irish provinces, I know Munster beat them in the URC semi-final last year, but will any of the other provinces ever be able to win a European Cup again? Will they be able to close this gap? And does the IRFU have a role in restructuring their models so that it's more even, whether it's a draft system for young players so that Munster can make a bid for a young Luke Fitzgerald coming through the academy at the time where he's 18 or 19 and they can offer more and he comes down, or whoever the hotshot is next year. Whether it's, I'm not sure how to do it. I have never been able to come up with a better model. But I do worry that people in the 3 other provinces will eventually just lose interest because they've no chance of winning. And we've won super province and 3 fairly mediocre ones. And I just wonder about that when it's supposed to be like the IRFU or the government, the guardians of the game. They're supposed to be looking after every corner of the game, not just Leinster. So it's nothing on Leinster. It's more I think David Humphries is coming in at a very interesting time in Irish rugby, taking over from Nusafora. I'm not sure which one of them signed off on this, but one of them did. And I wonder what they're going to do now for the other provinces to kind of help them get back to the level.
The point about solutions and making their province better, I think, is a good one, because some of the suggestions I've seen are kind of just let's just weaken Leinster so the other teams could get better. So what do we want? 4 kind of medium teams that none of them can actually win the European Cup? Obviously, you don't want Leinster streaking clear into the distance, which is kind of what's happening, especially with moves like this. But, look, you were saying before you think it'd be good. One suggestion is that, at the moment, seemingly the provinces can't outbid each other for the same player. So if I'm a Leinster, replacement out half and I get offered a chance to go to Ulster, it's on the same contract. So that's probably not that appealing. Whereas if Ulster can treat me like a marquee signing and say, oh, well, we can double your salary or we can give you this or that, a lot more tempting all of a sudden, and maybe some of the log jams we do see at Leinster could be alleviated and spread around, and Leinster would still be very strong. We know from the academy players, they're very good players. It's not as if they played some of those URC games the results would go completely drastically wrong. So do you think that could be one avenue?
It's really difficult to get this right, because as a business model, competing against yourself, if you're funding the whole operation, like the IRFU technically is, I suppose, for the most part, having 2 of your subsidiaries bidding against each other, it doesn't make any sense, really. So hard probably to sell that to whoever's the CFO in the IRFU at the moment, But I think what would be important for them to consider is that if the interest levels do dip in the provinces because they're not as competitive, well, then gates will go down. Then viewing figures will go down. Then all these things kind of happen, and so it's hard to know what. It's a bit of a chicken and egg. What do you do? Do you go at source and allow these other places to kind of outbid, say, a Leinster, or have Leinster capped for certain areas or certain positions? I don't know. I really don't know what the solution is. It's not really to. And Rud's, I'm saying what you're kind of saying as well. It's not really Leinster's responsibility to make sure that all the other provinces are successful. That's up to those provinces to go ahead and do that. But at the moment, I just really don't like the shape of this. I don't like nothing against Jordie Barrett. A quality player, seems like a good bloke, hard worker. He's in great shape. He'll definitely bring on Leinster as an outfit and help them compete for European gold again. But I just wonder, where does he go? So you've got Henshaw, Ringrose in the centres. I'm not sure I'd be...
And Osborne.
And Osborne. Sorry, I was going to put Osborne in. I'm going to say... So let me finish it. So I've got Henshaw, Ringrose, and I've got Keenan there, or his kind of... key. That's where he'd probably be playing most of his rugby. Would you start him ahead of any of those guys? I certainly wouldn't. I think that would be damaging for Ireland, and I think probably for Leinster as well. They're all kind of, they're all not necessarily local with Henshaw, but they're local Irish guys. I want to go see those guys, to be honest with you, as much as I'd like to see Jordie Barrett play. And then we kind of get to the wings. So you've got James Lowe, who's obviously a project, but he's Irish now. And for the other wing, you've got Larmour, who's starting to play some great rugby. Jimmy O'Brien coming back in. And let's throw into the mix now, you've got Frawley, who would be sitting on the bench if you don't start him. And then you've got Osborne, who's likely going to be sitting in some benches as well, who had a brilliant weekend. So do you curtail his progress? So I don't know where this one makes sense either. It's very exciting that he's coming. I can't wait to watch him, but I just don't think it makes any sense for a variety of reasons. And that's not having a go at him. I'm delighted he's come. I know why he's come. I think Leinster would be perfect for him, because I think people who come back, you're taking a risk on over to places like Japan because the quality of rugby is just not the same. Very, very different. He'll come back. I think, a better player. The Irish system does look after its players. You look after Snyman, they've done a great job with him for South Africa. You know what I mean? He's barely played any rugby here, and he goes back in great condition because the rehab facilities and all that kind of stuff is really, really good, and the time management's really good. So he goes back a better player from this experience, and he'll have a few extra quid in his pocket. So, and possibly a medal in his pocket. So, it's a great move for him. It's good for Leinster in some ways, but in other ways, and I think I'm more leaning this way. I don't like it for Leinster either. I think the homegrown talent that they have, I really feel like they might curtail some of these things. Now, what you could do to improve it is well, my initial thinking is that I don't know how to restructure the contract situation. That you'd really have to get in behind the numbers and see how that would work. And it's very hard to project what the impact would be on viewing figures, all those kind of things. Really hard to do. But what you could do is you could have a very serious conversation with someone like a Frawley or someone like an Osborne or some of these guys who look like really top quality players, and ask them about, if we paid you an extra 100k, would you go to Ulster? Would you go to Munster? Would you go to Connacht? Well, you have to start thinking it, because these guys cannot be sitting on the bench for Heineken Cups, or they can't be sitting behind Jordie Barrett. But you have to start, if you're paying Jordie Barrett big money, which they will be, they're going to have to justify that by playing him, I think. So I'm really torn on this one, Will. I really think they need to be a little bit creative, and Humphreys will have to be, I think.
Yeah, is there room for a reciprocal deal where Jamie Osborne, he's probably too far down the line, but goes off and plays Super Rugby for 6 months?
Something has to happen.
Because I look at James Culhane, and he's the rising star of the back row at Leinster Academy, 21 now, maybe 22. He's got Caelan Doris, Jack Cohn and Max Deegan ahead of him, and he'll get a probably game in South Africa in the next couple of weeks. But could he go to pro? Could he have spent the last 6 months in Pro D2? Could they arrange a loan for him at one of the clubs there, go off and live somewhere else, experience something else? Stuff, just to be creative with it. It's a different issue, obviously. Jordie Barrett, you can't, I don't think the IRFU could the IRFU have learned of Jordie Barrett's availability and gone, well, Munster on the lookout for a centre, could we position him there? But the fact that he has the connection with Leinster, I think negates that. He probably only
would have to agree.
He'd have to agree to it. I mean, I'm sure that there is a way of convincing him to do that.
Leinster though should have been going for a tight head, and Munster now with Frisch possibly on the go, that would have been a natural move.
It's almost like it came across Guy Easterby's desk and it was too good to turn down. I wonder.
That's what I think too.
And they have the budget,
and they're just this can't hurt.
Yeah, it won't hurt. If they don't win the Champions Cup next season with this squad, it'll be the greatest choke job of all time, because there's no one else with a squad of that strength. I'm sorry, that you sign Jordie Barrett and Roger Snyman to go with the Ireland team, you win the Champions Cup, or absolute Leinster, with the World Cup winning coach in charge as well.
If you look at the landscape, Leinster don't have to adhere to a salary cap. So they're in a league, the URC. They're competing against Welsh regions whose budget is probably the Leinster front row, probably, and that Leinster can spend on. They have the guts of the full Irish team, and they've been able to add in a World Cup winner in Rúaidhrí O'Connor and Jordie Barrett. That doesn't make sense to me. I know that the rules are the rules, and it's not.
Well, maybe it's up to the. There's never going to be a URC salary cap. There can't be, because there's too many. But the IRFU could put a salary. The IRFU could be looking at this and going, it's working to a point, and Ireland are doing pretty well. Not getting where we want them to get, but they're pretty consistently at the top of the table. This is working for us. Let's just keep going the way it is. And look, they'll be giving out down in Munster and Ulster and Connacht. But look, they'll get on with it, because Ireland will win Six Nations, and we've great games coming up in November. Or they could go, and this is it's a big risk if the IRFU come in and impose a self-imposed salary cap that forced Leinster to shed a load of their squad, which would then mean that they can't be consistent across the season, which then means they don't get the home last 16, quarter-final, semi-final, which generates all the income that allows them to go out and get these players. That also means that it's harder for them to get into the quarter-final, semi-final, final. And we could end up where we were back in 2016, where none of the Irish provinces get out of their pool. But there are, as you said, 4 mediocre provinces where it's much more democratic and evenly spread. But it's not elite. There's an elite school system, an elite academy, and an elite team. And what I suppose what they need to do is find a way of getting the other 3 up to that level, which is really difficult, without destroying the one thing that's working well. And I think what they need to do, I think Munster are probably the best example of this right now, because Ulster have new CEO, new head coach, possibly going to be Jared Payne. That's a rebuild from scratch. Munster have got their academy going the last couple of years. It's not as prodigious as Leinster, but I think putting Ian Costello in charge of operations, there's a structure there. There's a coaching ticket that's homegrown, but also very talented. They've got Ireland's 10. They've the young core nucleus of a team. And while there's a lot of retirements coming, I'm not as down on Munster's future as a lot of people are. I think they should be looking at Northampton, at Leicester, at some of the great of the English clubs who operate under a certain cap but make it work for themselves.
Well, Leicester might be a great example.
Well, that's true. Very, very true. But like Northampton, a homegrown backline, you know, a couple of clever signings that are kind of a bit of Moneyball stuff going on. Just there's a different way to go for, like, they're never going to be able to replicate Leinster because Leinster have the geographical financial advantages, but that doesn't mean you can't beat them. You just got to find a way to do it. Like in GAA, everyone gives out about Dublin. Well, Derry have come up with a model over the last couple of years that's now competitive. Like, they're completely different strategy. You could never impose Dublin system on anyone else. The same with Leinster. You cannot apply the Leinster model on any of the other provinces. You can maybe do a kind of a mini version in Ulster, but they don't have the population. So you've got to find your own way. It has to be true to your own identity. Like David Humphreys was in charge of Ulster when they were signing loads of overseas signing, and they came close, but they don't have the money to do that now, so it has to come from within. So it's very difficult, and it's a difficult, like, he's taking over from Nusafora at a very interesting time for Irish rugby in that the model has worked to a point, but if you have a team with 13, 14 Irish or Leinster players playing for Ireland, and even if it's successful, I think there is a risk to that all the time. And if the other three provinces are not successful, I think there is a risk to the overall health of the game here.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yes, so do I.
Yeah, it is an interesting one because, like, you know,
boring when we all agree, isn't it?
well,
It is.
I agree, but I don't think there's I've heard people say, oh, you know, every province should get at least 2 central contracts, but I don't think that makes sense either. They're giving giving contracts to players who aren't good enough to be in the Ireland team just to take their salaries. I'd rather the IRFU just give them the money than have that kind of.
But like, what's like? I think in the grand scheme, though, like, what does that mean? Does that mean is an extra? Is it an extra 150 grand a person? Like, for example, the Peter O'Mahony thing has been sitting in the background of Munster all year, a destabilising type issue for a player who's been an unbelievable servant, and it's very, very important at a pretty critical juncture for Munster. I think I agree. I'm actually not as down on Munster's future, but I do think they're still falling further behind this year than I thought they would. I thought they'd be kind of moving forward this year. They had a lot of bad luck, but just as an example, for an extra 150, 200 grand a year, why is it a problem to have, you know, 2 more essentially contracted players in each place, or at least allocate the extra funds to those places so that they can attract a few more? I don't see what the big issue in doing that is. I am very concerned about the gap. I am concerned about that. I think we probably haven't. You did mention roads, but I think that's a big issue, and I just from an enjoyment perspective too. I don't want to see Leinster rolling over, you know, Connacht, Ulster, and Munster. I don't want to see that. I don't join them.
It's been like that since 2009 for the most part. Like,
no,
have been the dominant for 15 years.
But is it rolling over? No, I don't think it's gotten that.
It's gotten more. No,
I know there's been phases where Leinster weren't great. Like, I played
there has been
teams where there was a struggle. You know, but it's definitely it's.
But the pecking order, I'm saying, has been pretty defined since 2009.
That's fair.
Like, that's what I mean.
Well, for some sporadic.
Yeah, maybe the odd season or two.
Look at Snyman, right? You know, like the RFU, I think, need to be more creative and go when John Klein got capped and they had 2 Springbok second rows. If Snyman wanted to stay in Munster and Munster wanted to retain Snyman, they shouldn't have been forced to get rid of him. Because there's 3 or 4 Ireland second rows.
You have enough
Leinster,
second rows playing.
You have a couple up in Ulster. Yeah. You have like Connacht are all Irish qualified second rows. Like, I think you can say you can write it out. You can write out the criticism of having 2 Springboks in.
You don't need 8. You don't need 8 playing week in week.
No, and just in this
4
specific,
or 5 good ones, and
you also need Munster to be competitive. And Snyman makes Munster better. So forcing them to get rid of Snyman, maybe like people will say they couldn't afford him. Well, they've been able to afford him up until this point. So I'd say they would have found the money for it. So like, there are moments where the RFU need to have a bit of discretion in these decisions, and I think the message it sends that Snyman is going up the road. At the time, I just think it sends out like Leinster. Sure, go out and sign Etzebeth instead, but like.
Why though?
No, sorry, yeah, I mean that goes against what I'm saying. But like,
don't need Snyman either.
Of all the second rows to go and get the one from Munster. It's like, I just think that's one of those moments where the RFU could have gone, do you know what? Yes, we want to have as many Irish qualified second rows in our system, but like, even the fact that he's blocking. He's moving to Leinster, so he's still in the Irish system. They could have left him in Munster, you know, for all that he played for Munster anyway. that would have been a moment where you're going, do you know what, we'll protect Munster a little bit here by leaving them with that guy, and look, we'll rely on Leinster and Ulster, and we'll
obviously
try.
couldn't have foreseen the Dogbu kind of injury. You know what I mean?
That's circumstance. Like, that's why
it is. But for example, I'm assuming that they were thinking, okay, we really like the look of this fella.
Yeah.
Now, powerful,
Tom Ahern as well.
Tom Ahern, who has had a pretty good.
But he can play six. Snyman can play six.
But I assume that's the thinking. But he's going to do the exact same thing in Leinster if that was the thinking in Munster. If you're going, he's blocking an Irish guy who's could be playing, week in, week out in URC in Champions Cup, he'll be doing the exact same thing in Leinster. So I just don't think it makes any sense to have him there. It might have made sense if he was allowed to go to Ulster on that basis. Do you know what I mean? You say, oh, well, he can partner next to Henderson, who's actually, so I don't know. It feels like a really odd move. It feels like the Jordie Barrett's a really odd move. It's great for Leinster supporters, but I just feel like...
Leo said a couple of years ago, I was on a supporters call that... Leinster invited me to listen to this Q&A with supporters a couple of years ago, where Leo was asked about over. No, I wasn't there surreptitiously. I was, he said, "Look, come on, you'll get something out of it." And Leo was asked about overseas signings, and he was saying, "Well, I have pretty much have the Ireland team. The Ireland team is one of the best teams in the world. For me to sign someone, they have to be better than the Ireland starter." So he's in a difficult position when he's going to the market, because he's looking at what's available and he's going, well, he's not better than Gary Ringrose. He's not better than James Ryan. So they've gone and got two players who do live in that company. And if they're training better, they get into the team. So arguably that makes Henshaw better, because Henshaw's then going, I need to play well to hang on to that spot. So there is an argument for that. Now there's also, you've got two players who could play a big role in Ireland's World Cup campaign in 3 years' time, coming in, learning the system and reporting back to base when they go home. You've got the South Africa two-time World Cup winning coach who's on a 2-year contract that expires 2 years through a World Cup cycle, who conceivably could go home and bring a lot of information with him. But I suppose you can't be a closed shop either. So it does, it does. So there's so much in it, and it just feels there's a little bit of that's just it feels a little bit unfair. The big bad Leinster just strengthening. We're going to their assistant coach being announced later on. He's got Munster connections. It's just going to keep ramming home that sense that they keep getting bigger and everyone else is being left behind.
I think what magnifies it as well is that the overseas signings for the other provinces, between bad luck and bad signings the last few years, have been almost uniformly poor. If you look at Stephen Kitchoff, that's been an unmitigated disaster. Obviously a great player.
Has it been that?
Well, he's leaving after 1 year.
Yeah, but is that's probably budgetary up there, really?
Well, budgetary, but he hasn't been playing very well either.
Well, sorry.
Yeah, you compare him and Dwayne Vermeulen to what they got out of Coetzee, what they got out of Ruan Pienaar, what they got out of
a year injured too.
Oh, he did, absolutely.
Same between bad looking as well.
Yeah.
But then you look Cordero for Connacht, he was their marquee signing. He got injured in pre-season. See, even Munster last year, they bring in Fekitoa. He has a terrible start. They basically offload him midway through the season. Then he plays unbelievable and they win the league, but he's already out the door. Snyman's obviously been injured pretty much the entire time, and now he's going to Leinster.
Didn't want to know.
He was good.
He was decent.
He was good, but he was gone.
As soon as he arrived, he wanted to go. That was Dielende.
Oh, Dielende,
yeah.
Nankerveld's very good, different profile of signing, but he's been a really good
obviously Frisch has been good, but then he's going back the door as well. So between some, as I said, bad luck, bad form, bad signings, if some of these guys, if they'd hit on some of these signings, it wouldn't feel, I don't think, quite as jarring.
Yeah, I think the Ben Healy, Frisch, Jean Klein thing, where had any of those players been capped by Andy Farrell, they all would have stayed and probably still be Munster player. Or sorry, Snyman would be a Munster player, and Healy and Klein would be. Sorry, Healy and Frisch.
Klein hadn't got capped.
Snyman would have stayed, and then Ben Healy but Andy Farrell can't be capping lads just to keep them in Munster either.
That's not right. That's not
there
right.
There definitely was a case for Klein to come into the World Cup squad. He had a very good end to last season, and he offers something different. He was a better player then than he was when he captained 19. But I don't think Frisch has done enough to get in ahead of Gary Ringrose or Robbie Henshaw or Bundy Aki, and I don't know if Ben Healy was really in that conversation. He only hit form really after he had moments of form, but he never looked like an international 10 in the Johnny Sexton era. He's him going to Scotland is not really Andy Farrell's fault either. But I do think that feeds into, again, the Munster sense of grievance against Nucifora. It goes back to, he's gone out the door, I know, but he blocked Stephen Moore signing for them a couple of years ago. He told Ulster that Ruan Pienaar couldn't stay. His record. Leinster had massive rows with him over the years, and he blocked signings there as well. But the perception, I think, is that it's just this Dublin thing, and this helps feed that perception, even if it's not true.
I can't help thinking about it, and I try not to be biased, but I am, of course, a little bit biased. You know what I mean? I don't think it's a great look. The funny thing is, though, it's great to hear that, because the one thing I have said about Leinster's overseas signings the last while is that they didn't make any sense to me. Like, whereas that's good that I was kind of saying, I've been pushing for Leinster to do this, to go for a Brad Thorne, to go for an Easton Asiwa type player, Rocky Elsom, and these players do fit that mould. My one issue with it at the moment is that I just feel like they don't need it. That's my big thing. I think if
Jordie Barrett kicks a 60-metre penalty to win the
but if Frawley kicks the 60 metres against La Rochelle in the group stage, so they don't. There was a period where Leinster, I felt like, were off the pace against Saracens, and I thought, okay, there are probably one or two positions where I'm saying, yeah, like a marquee would tip the team over, and it's like maybe one position out of 15. Whereas I don't feel that about this Leinster team. That's my one.
Again, you're looking at Leinster, right? You've got Jack Crowley's the number 110 in Ireland. Then you have 4 players who are behind him, all at Leinster.
Yeah,
that doesn't make. And now you're signing Jordie Barrett, and they're going 6-2 every week.
Yeah,
so that, like, Jordie Barrett's going to be the number 23 because he is better than Kieran Frawley at this point of his career. He's only a year older than him. So what does that? So you got Harry, Kieran Frawley, Sam Prendergast, all kicking their heels on weekends when they could be playing Champions Cup rugby for someone else.
Now,
they might not be getting as much as good a coaching as they are at Leinster, and they might not develop as well as players. But like, if I was Sam Prendergast, I'd be saying again, send me off to the top 14 for a year. Give me
off to Ulster.
Japan, New Zealand, anywhere.
You don't want to go. Like, they're all being offered these. No, they're
not being offered.
But if Leo Cullen went to Sam Prendergast and said, "Look, we've done a deal with a top Pro D2 or lower top 14 team who need a 10. You're going there to play every week for a season. We want to back you."
Why would Leo Cullen want to do that?
Because he wants this guy to come back with a year of proper.
No, he wants him there.
100%.
For what?
He wants him there.
So he can pay for as you see your Lance. So he can play club rugby, play.
Training. He'll argue the training is better there. I guarantee that's what they'll argue.
You've got to play rugby.
Sorry.
I think
I don't think the training in the Pro D2 is.
I'm playing devil's advocate here.
As a life experience, like playing for, but you got to be strategic and pick a club that's run well, and you strike up a little bit of a relationship with them. Like this guy's one of the best young tens in the world. Everyone says he's not ready. I don't think he's ready either. But he's playing 6 games in an entire season at the age of 21. Like the kid, he played in a World Cup final against the kid who ran the show for Toulouse on Sunday. The centre, his name's escaped me, Paul. Anyway, Koss. He played in the final. Deporter played for France in the Six Nations. He played against him in the World Cup final as well. But Prendergast is playing 6 games a season. He's been managed, and player management is very important. He's not physically developed enough yet, but at some point, Culhan, these guys need to play rugby.
Play match.
And at the moment, he's got where's he going to get his opportunities next year?
Yeah, but just to finish up, we could be on this all night. Connacht and Ulster suffered, quite disappointing defeats.
I think this is one week where Connacht and Ulster fans would probably be quite happy if we didn't talk about them. And
usually talk about it. Well, I said it last. The way the French teams picked their teams for the last 16 probably was a bit flattering to how Connacht and Ulster got through, and it was fairly rude awakening last weekend.
Yeah, they were ugly, weren't they? Yeah. Tough. We talked about the Gulf, and I think when you're not even doing it at that level, and there were ugly scorelines. I think. Rough. I'm a bit concerned. I think it's a tough job. Like Richie Murphy. I mean, that's a tough job, isn't it? I don't know if he'll actually come out of that better than. Do you think it was? I mean, what's your sense of that at this point?
I think the feeling is that he's still going to lead the 20s in the summer, and
so he's coming back.
It's up in the air as to whether he's going to get the job full time at the end of it. As I said earlier, I've heard Jared Payne's name mentioned. He was talked about as the Leinster job, but he's not getting the Leinster job, so the attack coach job. It's a massive like Ulster. I still think have huge potential, but there's a massive reset happening there. Humphreys, the IRFU were fully involved because they're not happy with the way things have been run in the last couple of years financially. Like they've gone from being able to have John Afoa, Jared Payne.
Was that a benefactor though?
No one ever really explained what that was. I mean, the Kingspan deal was huge. It was one of the best. Maybe. Well, that was always denied. But they got Kingspan they got the Kingspan on as marquee sponsors, like really good sponsorship. One of the best sponsorships I'd say in Irish rugby history. A bit like the Toyota deal that Munster had back when they were thriving. They were well run. Humphreys did a really good job. Clever recruitment, really strong. Got to a Champions Cup final. probably ahead of schedule. But like, you know, I remember being up there when they lost to Saracens the night Payne was sent off. But that season was their season.
Yeah.
That's 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
And they've squandered it. Like, you know, whether it's, I mean,
They've had good young talent though.
They've
Like,
had
that's the
loads of
thing.
it, but
the pack has never really been the same though. Once Afoa left, Muller left, like you're kind of going.
And this goes back to Stephen Ferris putting the two teams up and comparing them.
God,
and McCluskey calling them out, but that's not a good sign either. You know,
you're even watching that, like
Yeah.
when you're looking at it, like, and in fairness, like it's hard not to because I seem to be getting it from all corners, and it's a place that's under pressure. Yeah, Fez, in fairness, like he does like to poke a little bit. Like that's always been his character. I don't think there was any badness in it, but like do you know what it was? I think because the difference in the squads was so stark. I was like, oof.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You were kind of looking at going, it's literally McCluskey getting in there, and that's it. Like, you know, that was a pretty rough. I'd say when he saw it on paper, he's like, "That's not." You know, he saw that.
I'd say he meant it more. Directed it more at, you know, not that I'm here to speak for Fez, but like, you know, that he'd probably just directed more at the organisation. How has it come to this, rather than the players themselves? But obviously the players themselves are feeling pretty wounded.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they're both in a scrap in the URC to try and get into the top 8 to get back into the competition.
Can't see Connacht getting back in.
I can't see.
I was kind of conceding that first half.
Shocking.
Yeah, it's shambolic. Their defence all season has been really, really poor. They haven't improved. I think they've really missed Andy Friend. You know, I think, you know, he was such a good figurehead for that organisation. Wilkins, good coach, very highly regarded, but, you know, I just don't get the sense.
Had that good feel about him. Didn't
good
you get
feel,
that
but he
sense
had some steel as well. He's well able to stand up to Bundy Aki. You know, I thought it was, you know, not a great look for Bundy to be back chatting to the ref late on either. You know, I just don't know if you know, I think he's not the same player. He's had some great performances for Connacht in the last 2 weeks. Like, you know, he's shown up for them in the last 2 weeks, but he doesn't show up enough for Connacht. He doesn't play enough for Connacht. He looks like they need to get him back on side, get him to buy into the whole thing again, and not just be an Ireland player who kind of pitches up every so often for them. And it's not depending on him either. Like, I thought Jennings looked really good in the wing. I'd say Andy Farrell watched that performance, thought this guy's got a bit of something. But overall, look, their defence in Europe.
You have to have something to build on. Like,
Yes.
you have to be a little bit stingy sometimes, because it's not always going to work out for you in attack. That for a team like Connacht, you have to have that, and there's a team spirit part of that too. It's not just a grisly kind of gnarly side to be in defence, like a defensive thing. You have to have a tightness and a bit of belief in you that you can grind out a win or two, and they just haven't had any of that as far as I can see. And even in the big ones at the start of the season, you think of the Leinster one was very disheartening. You know, there's a few of those ones at the end of the game, like kind of soft scores to give away when you really should be kind of gritty and kind of digging one out. You know, your defence has to help you at times, and they just haven't had that all season, and they have to have that. They can't. They're never going to be a team. Their pack is. They just do not have the budget to be bullying teams and have a bad day out where they can rely on a maul or their scrum to destroy a team and penalty kicks. It's not that. That's not the model down there. They're going to have to play expansive rugby, and if that's not working, they've got to have a good defence. That's a problem for them, and they need to fix it pretty quickly, because it doesn't. I think it's probably too late at this stage for them. I don't think the results are great either.
They need 10 points, and they've got the Zebre, then the Dragons, and then they've got isn't it Munster,
Leinster,
Stormers in the last 3 games.
There's nothing there for them.
So
in the last 3.
it's such a tough run in. The only thing, you know, they got the Leinster in the last days. That's the ODS, isn't it? Or maybe, I don't know where it'll be, but the Leinster will probably have qualified and maybe in the middle of knockouts and stuff. But that's you're still hoping, you're still crossing your fingers, you know, and it's not good.
The Andy Friend point as well, like when we were talking about overseas signings, he had a good eye for like kind of these unloved players in other. Obviously, Mark Hansen was one of them, but like, you know, most famously, but other guys, like, you know, he brought in like Hurley Langton as well, who was good, and a couple of other guys of that mould over the years, which was, you know,
like you were right to mention Cordero earlier, but like, you know, Cordero doesn't come in and fix your defensive system, you know, and like that's. You know, it's been a rough year for Scott Fardy.
Decent locks there. You know, you think there's a basis for a good defence. They've just pretty strong centre pairing when Bundy's in there. Like, I don't see why there's an issue. That's
good young players. Like Devine looked good at the weekend. Jennings looked really good. Like Colin Ford's been a really good addition this year. There's stuff to build on.
Through, like Hugh Gavin as well as another one.
And maybe being in the Challenge Cup for Connacht, you know, they don't have a big stadium to sell it anyway. And it allows them maybe to be able to focus on URC games and be a bit more targeted on how they approach the season next year. Whereas for Ulster, they need the Champions Cup money. You know, they need that they're at a different stage. Like, if they fall into the Challenge Cup, it's going to be a struggle to sell season tickets. Also, the Connacht was said Connacht want Champions Cup because they want season tickets, like everyone else. But I just wonder, because they've prioritised the stadium and their budget is much smaller, they possibly could do with a year of just focusing on the URC, get into the knockouts and get a run.
Well, we'll finish up with the left wing moment of the week in association with Bank of Ireland. Mine, guys, is the Bordeaux Harlequins game. Just generally as one big 80-minute moment. I know it's kind of cheating, but 42-41, it was absolutely unbelievable. It shows what the Champions Cup can be about, like when it's really rocking. Like an English team going to Bordeaux, they were massive underdogs. It's a classic Harlequins game where like they're never going to win like 9-6. It's always going to be like end to end. Like conceding 41 points and still winning a knockout game in France is unbelievable going. Some great tries as well. Came down to a misconversion from Bordeaux, so it was brilliant. What about you, Ruud?
I'm sad for Bordeaux though. Like I love, it just shows how hard it is to win this tournament. I didn't get to see my moment of the week live, but I guess Luke was probably going to go for a Leinster one, and I've gone with the Irish women's team. The final whistle going, and they've finally been able to. The relief you can see on the players' faces. Whatever about Leinster getting the monkey off their back with La Rochelle after that series of big defeats in the Six Nations live on national TV, to be able to not just beat Wales but hammer Wales in Cork in front of a really good young crowd, a really strong performance, lots of green shoots about what they're able to do, and that team, I think no one probably wanted or deserved to win more. I think like they put a lot into this, and like they played some good rugby as well. So rather than pick Aoife Wafer's try or Bevian Parsons' try, I think just the collective release of that whistle going after 80 minutes, they deserve a bit of a mention.
And Sinead did a really good podcast with Anna and Ali looking back on that win that you can get in the left wing feed. Luke, we'll finish off with your moment of the week.
I'm going to go with the Henshaw crossfield kick. It was kind of a pretty key period in the game as well. Kind of killed off the La Rochelle fight, and really difficult skill to execute. It looked like it was something that I said at the start, where it looked like they'd target if they could get that ball to the second receiver with a little bit of time, enough to put a kick in behind the wings. It looked to me like a tactic, just because of the odds were won in the first half as well. Like a young player doing that, maybe it just was the moment of magic, but I think it looked like a tactic to me. And the execution, Lowe kind of didn't get a great grab on it, but finished it brilliantly when he did get his hands on it. But that's my moment of the week. I just thought it was a bit of magic in a big game. Love to see it.
Well, it really was a great weekend. I'd thank Ruud and Luke for joining me on this week's episode of the Left Wing Podcast. We will be back next week with another show looking back on all the latest action. In the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.